Hey guys, tonight we begin with something that might just ruin bathrooms for you forever. We're going back to medieval times, not the castles, not the knights, but something far, far less glamorous. Tonight, you'll find yourself waking up somewhere around the year 1350, and before you've even stretched your aching limbs, one urgent problem starts to bubble up. Nature is calling. You blink open your eyes. It's dark, damp, and cold. The air is heavy with the smell of wet straw, old sweat, and something else you can't even name. The mattress beneath you isn't really a mattress, it's a half-rotted sack of straw that's seen better centuries. Your blanket? A thick, grimy piece of wool that might weigh more than you do, thanks to months of dirt, oil, and you don't even want to think about it. You sit up slowly, your back creaking like the ancient wooden beams above you. The cold air immediately bites your skin. There's no heating, no insulation, just you, the cold, and an audience of rodents watching from the corner. The floor is uneven mud, crusted over in places where rain dripped through the thatch roof overnight. And somewhere nearby, a chicken clucks softly. That's right, your bedroom is also your livestock's bedroom. Privacy? Never heard of it. You shift your legs over the side of the bidor, what passes for a bidan, your bare feet sink into something damp. It's either yesterday's rain or something else. Either way, it's cold, squishy, and not how you wanted to start your day. You shiver. Your knees crackle as you stand. You're 22 years old, which in medieval terms makes you practically ancient. Your bones already feel like they belong to a much older person, and you haven't even made it to the bathroom yet. And that, dear listener, is the problem. The bathroom. There isn't one. There's no toilet, no sink, no soft rolls of paper waiting by the side. Just you, your urgent need, and centuries of horrifyingly primitive solutions to that very basic human problem. Outside the door, really, the hole in the wall that counts as a door, there's a wooden bucket. That's it. That's the bathroom. If you're lucky, it isn't already full to the brim with the evidence of last night's dinner choices. If you're unlucky, well, let's just say you'll need to make some creative choices. And here's the thing. No one in the village is shocked by this. This is how things are done. When you're done using the bucket, you do what everyone else does. You pick it up, hold your breath, and chuck the contents straight into the street. Really. Right into the middle of the dirt road where everyone walks. The only polite thing to do is shout something like, "Gardaloo," Old French for "watch out below," before you send your business flying. But let's be honest, no one really moves fast enough. So the streets are rivers of waste, animal droppings, spilled ale, and mystery liquids you really, really don't want to step in. And you thought modern city sidewalks were bad. By now, you're probably wondering, why didn't they just build proper toilets? Good question. Historians still argue whether it was a matter of resources, superstition, or simply the fact that no one thought of it yet. What we do know is that for most medieval people, especially peasants, using the toilet was more public than private, more disgusting than dignified, and almost always an exercise in desperation. The smell is something you'll never forget. A medieval morning isn't complete without the overpowering stench of human waste baked into the very bones of the town. Even on a good day, with the breeze blowing just right, the odor sticks to everything: your clothes, your skin, your soul. But you can't hold it forever. So you do what must be done. And here's a fun, if horrifying fact. Some people didn't even bother with buckets. They'd simply squat in the corner of the room or find a quiet alley. And if you lived in a bigger town, public latrines were sometimes available. Public meant sitting shoulder to shoulder with strangers. No partitions, no privacy, and definitely no ventilation. Imagine trying to make polite conversation while sitting over a pit full of centuries of, well, you get the idea. For women, by the way, it was even worse. Trying to relieve yourself while wearing several layers of heavy medieval clothing in public conditions? Not easy. Historians still debate whether women faced additional dangers, both physical and social, when using public or outdoor toilets. Some say women carried small pots or bordaloos hidden under skirts for emergencies. Others argue that this was more common in later centuries. Either way, comfort was never part of the equation. And before you ask, no, there's no toilet paper. People wiped with moss, rags, straw, leaves, or just didn't. The handshake, by the way? Yeah, not popular back then. Probably for obvious reasons. At this point, you might be missing your own bathroom back home. The one with 4 walls, plumbing, and a lock on the door. And maybe, just maybe, you'll never take it for granted again. But here's the thing. This is just the start of your medieval day. You've barely gotten out of bed, braved the cold, and faced the medieval toilet. The real Horsewell, those are still waiting. So, you've done it. You survived your first medieval bathroom experience here. Rather, the absolute absence of what you and I would call a bathroom. You've dumped the bucket, whispered an apology to your shoes, and now you're standing there, shivering, wondering what on earth comes next. The answer, as you'll soon find out, is it only gets weirder. You glance back at the hut, the drafty wooden box you call home, and for one tiny fleeting second, you consider crawling back into that moldy straw pile and calling it a day. But no. The chickens are clucking, the church bell is chiming, the town is waking up. And whether you like it or not, you've got things to do. But first, there's a problem. Your hands. You didn't wash them because there's no running water, no soap, and certainly no hand sanitizer. In fact, most medieval people didn't even think to wash their hands after using the toilet. Germ theory? Not invented yet. The idea that tiny, invisible creatures could make you sick would have sounded like wizardry to people in 1350. So instead, you wipe your hands on your tunicle more likely. Just carry on with your day, spreading microscopic disaster to every door handle, loaf of bread, and unfortunate handshake along the way. And that's just how it was. Historians still argue whether people truly believed dirt was dangerous, or whether they associated cleanliness more with social status than health. Some records suggest that certain wealthy folks did bathe occasionally, key word. Occasionally, but for the average peasant, clean hands were an afterthought, if they were a thought at all. Now, let's talk about where all this waste actually went. Remember how you tossed your business into the street? Well, you weren't alone. Your neighbors did the same, and their neighbors, and their neighbors' neighbors. The result? A charming medieval phenomenon known as the open sewer. Imagine this. Narrow, muddy streets lined with leaning timber houses. Above, tattered sheets and laundry flap in the wind. Below, a grim, sticky stream of wastewater, rotting food scraps, animal droppings, and let's not sugarcoat human feces. Every time it rains, this toxic soup bubbles and splashes, turning roads into rivers of filth. You can't avoid it. Your feet sink into it. The smell crawls into your lungs. And worse, this open sewer is shared not just by humans but by pigs, dogs, chickens, and especially rats. In fact, rats become so abundant in medieval towns that they're practically part of the furniture. And yes, historians still argue whether medieval city planners ever truly considered the health risks of living ankle-deep in filth. The answer, unsurprisingly, is probably not. Speaking of animals, here's a fun and utterly disgusting tidbit. Many medieval homes didn't just have livestock nearby, they had livestock inside. That's right, your house, already overcrowded with family members, also hosts goats, chickens, and sometimes even pigs. Why? Because animals were valuable, and locking them up outside was risky. So, you shared your living space, your air, your fleas, and yes, your toilet arrangements with your four-legged friends. And here's where things get truly surreal. In some towns, there were fines for dumping waste in the wrong place, but no one enforced them. You could technically be punished for pouring your bucket too close to the marketplace, but in practice, everyone did it, and the authorities mostly shrugged. Some cities experimented with underground sewers as early as the Roman era, but by medieval times, those systems had collapsed both literally and figuratively. The infrastructure was gone, the knowledge was forgotten, and for hundreds of years, Europe wallowed sometimes literally in its own mess. By now, you're probably asking yourself, did people just get used to the smell? The answer is yes, they did. Medieval folks didn't have scented candles, air fresheners, or hot showers to reset their senses. The stench was as normal as birdsong in the morning. And still, you can't help but gag a little as you shuffle past your neighbor's doorstep, where yesterday's chamber pot has been dumped into the gutter. You pull your threadbare cloak tighter around your shoulders, teeth chattering. Your breath puffs in soft white clouds. The cold is so sharp it makes your fingers ache, but you can't go back inside just yet. There's work to do. And besides, your house doesn't smell much better. At this point, you haven't even eaten yet. Your stomach grumbles, but breakfast isn't the cheerful, cozy affair you might be imagining. No buttery toast, no steaming mug of tea, no crispy bacon. In medieval Europe, breakfast is barely a thing. If you're lucky, you'll get a bowl of thin, pottage-essentially vegetable mush that's been reheated for the third or fourth day in a row. If you're very lucky, maybe there's a scrap of stale bread hard enough to break a tooth on. And what do you wash it down with? Water? Oh no. The local well is likely contaminated with you guessed Itranoff from the very streets you just dumped your bucket into. So instead, you drink weak beer. Yes, beer for breakfast. Even children drank it. The alcohol content was low, but it was safer than the water. This strange custom lasted for centuries. Some historians still argue whether beer's central place in medieval diets was purely practical or whether people just liked a little buzz to get through the misery of daily life. And here comes another quirky detail. In some towns, people actually believed that human waste could ward off evil spirits or bring good luck. There were even superstitions about which direction you should face while relieving yourself to avoid bad omens. This, of course, makes your morning routine not only uncomfortable, but spiritually confusing as well. You finish your grim little meal. Your feet are still cold. The mud is still oozing. The streets are still rivers of filth. And you, my unfortunate medieval friend, are only at the very beginning of a very long and very disgusting day. You've made it through the morning. Sort of. You face the bucket, the filth-filled streets, the freezing air, and a breakfast so grim it barely counts as food. And yet, somehow, the day marches on. The sun is crawling higher, though it's barely more than a pale smudge in the gray sky, and now it's time for work. But before we get to that, let's pause and talk about the smell. Yes, again, because if there's one thing that defines medieval life, it's the inescapable stench. Imagine a place where everything the people, the animals, the houses, the street smells faintly or not so faintly of decay. And the worst part? No one notices. It's just normal. Your nose gives up somewhere around day 2 of living in this world. The human nose, scientists say, can adjust to persistent smells remarkably well, and medieval Europe pushed that adaptation to its absolute limits. Some scholars argue that medieval people simply didn't care about odors the way we do. Others suggest that they associated bad smells with sin or moral decay rather than, say, bacteria. Whatever the reason, the smell was part of life. Just like fleas, just like cold, just like the constant gnawing hunger. You trudge through the muddy streets, passing neighbors who look just as tired, cold, and filthy as you feel. Some of them carry chamber pots, others balance baskets of vegetables, others are already hard at work. The cobbler hammers away at worn leather shoes, the blacksmith's forge smokes in the distance. And everywhere, there are animals. Dogs roam the streets, pigs snuffle through garbage, chickens dart between footsteps, and through it all flows the endless river of waste. But let's say you're lucky today. Let's say you live in one of the slightly more advanced towns someplace that has public latrines. That sounds better, right? Well, not really. Public latrines in medieval towns were, to put it gently, nightmares. Often built over rivers or streams, these outhouses consisted of long wooden benches with holes cut into them, perched above a pit or a waterway. There were no walls between seats. No doors, no privacy. Just a row of strangers all engaged in the exact same grim business. You sit shoulder to shoulder, knees practically touching, as you try to do your business without making eye contact. The smell is unbearable. The floor is slippery with mud or worse. The wooden boards creak ominously beneath you, and you can't help but wonder how many people have fallen straight into the filth below. The answer? More than you'd think. In fact, some medieval records describe accidents where people drowned in cesspits or rivers while using these facilities. It's a fate so horrifying that even the bravest knights might hesitate. And let's not forget, there's no toilet paper here either. Just as before, you're left with moss, rags, leaves, or if you're extremely fortunate, a scrap of rough wool. If not, well, you get creative. Some scholars suggest that people even used handfuls of straw or the corner of their own clothing in desperate moments. And yes, the risk of infection from these practices was enormous. But back then, no one knew. It's not just the physical discomfort that makes this so grim. There's the psychological horror too. Imagine the sheer indignity of it all, of being unable to relieve yourself in private, of sitting exposed, vulnerable among strangers in the cold. Imagine the fear not just of disease, but of violence, harassment, or even humiliation. For women especially, the risks were doubled. Some medieval texts hint that women avoided public latrines entirely, opting instead to sneak into alleys or fields despite the dangers. Historians still debate the extent of this, but it's clear that privacy, especially for women, was a luxury most could only dream of. And let's say you're not in a town. Let's say you're traveling, or working in the fields, or just too far from any latrine to use it. What then? Simple. You go where you can. Behind a bush, by the roadside, in the woods. And this too was completely normal. In fact, in some regions, people deliberately built designated waste fields where travelers could relieve themselves, not because it was polite, but because the alternative was worse. And here's another odd little fact. Some wealthy people lords, nobles, even kings had something resembling a portable toilet, a commode chair. Essentially a wooden seat with a chamber pot built in. Servants would empty it regularly, or not so regularly. But even this was far from sanitary. One famous case tells of an English monarch who reportedly fell ill after the fumes from his own chamber pot wafted upward for too long. Whether true or not, the story speaks volumes about how grim even the luxury options really were. By now, you might be wondering, did anyone ever bathe? And the answer is yes, but not often. Bathing was expensive, time-consuming, and in some places even seen as suspicious. Some believed that hot baths could open the pores and let in diseases. Others thought washing too often was a sign of vanity or sin. Bathhouses existed, but mostly in cities, and they were often associated with more adult entertainment. Cleanliness wasn't the goal, and soap? Rare. Most people simply rubbed themselves with cloths, scraped dirt off with blunt knives, or used ashes in lying crude attempts at washing. So you press on. You've survived the public latrine, you've dodged the worst puddles, and your hands still unwashed clutch at your thin cloak as you head toward your work for the day. Whether you're a blacksmith, a baker, a tanner, or a simple farmhand, one thing is certain, you'll get dirty. Dirtier than you already are somehow. Because medieval life wasn't just smelly, it was exhausting, backbreaking, and endlessly filthy. The sun creeps higher, your stomach grumbles again, you try not to breathe too deeply. And as you step carefully around yet another pile of something unidentifiable in the street, you can't help but wonder, how did anyone survive this? Historians still argue about the true day-to-day realities of peasant life. Some suggest that people were surprisingly resilient, that their immune systems, honed by constant exposure, kept them alive despite the grime. Others argue that sickness, disease, and early death were simply accepted as inevitable. Whatever the truth, you're living it now, one careful step at a time. And remember, you haven't even made it to lunch yet. The morning drags on, and with every breath of cold, foul air, you start to realize something. This isn't just a bad day, it's every day. The mud, the stench, the endless discomfort. Welcome to medieval life. And guess what? You still haven't escaped the toilet situation. Because when nature calls again later today, tomorrow, or the day after, you'll have to face it all over again. There's no escape from it, no plumbing, no relief. Just the same filthy routine, repeated until you either get used to it or you don't. As you shuffle along the muddy path, you pass another neighbor, an old man stooped over, clutching his back. He gives you a tired nod. His teeth are blackened stumps. His hands are cracked and caked with dirt. His clothes, like yours, haven't been washed in weeks, or maybe months, maybe never. And the smell clings to him like a second skin. You're heading to the fields now, or maybe to the blacksmith's forge, or maybe to help haul water from the village well. Whatever your task, one thing is guaranteed. You'll be dirty, cold, and sore by the time it's done. But here's the thing. There's something even worse lurking beneath all of this discomfort. Something invisible, something deadly. Diseases. Remember that open sewer running through your town? That's not just an eyesore, it's a breeding ground. Cholera, typhoid, dysentery. These aren't just words in a textbook. They're living, breathing threats in every puddle, every bucket, every careless hand. And no one understands why. Germs haven't been discovered yet. People believe sickness comes from bad air or punishment from God. Some even think certain smells can heal you, which is why people carry sweet-smelling herbs in little bags called pomanders around their necks. It doesn't work, of course, but it gives them hope. Historians still argue whether medieval townspeople really understood the connection between filth and disease. Some documents suggest city officials knew that keeping streets cleaner helped control outbreaks. Others show total ignorance, where waste and sickness are simply accepted facts of life. Either way, you, the average person, know nothing. All you know is that people get sick. And when they do, they often don't get better. As you work, the cold seeps into your bones. Your hands blister, your back aches. And still, your mind drifts back to that morning trip to the toilet. Because it never leaves you, really. The discomfort sticks with you. The smell lingers. The knowledge that you'll have to do it all again soon hangs over your head like a bad omen. But let's say for a moment that you're not a peasant. Let's say you're someone a little higher up the ladder, a merchant perhaps, or even minor nobility. Surely things are better for you, right? Well, sort of. Yes, the wealthier classes have some advantages. They might have access to private guardrobes, essentially stone cubbyholes built into castle walls with a simple hole that drops waste outside. Some even have wooden seats. Luxury, but don't get too excited. These toilets don't flush. The waste piles up below where it either seeps into the ground or sits in a festering heap until some unfortunate servant is tasked with cleaning it. And yes, servants sometimes fall into these pits. It's not just a joke, it actually happened. In some castles, guardrobes were placed over moats. This seemed clever at first until enemy soldiers realized they could climb in through the waste chutes during sieges. Talk about an undignified way to lose a castle. And the smell? Still terrible. Even the richest lords and ladies lived in homes that reeked of unwashed bodies, chamber pots, and rotting food. Some castles burned herbs or incense to mask the odors. But it was a losing battle. Bathing helped, but baths were rare and complicated. Heating enough water took hours, and in winter, most people simply didn't bother. In fact, in certain periods, bathing was actively discouraged. Some doctors of the time warned that bathing could make you sick by opening the pores. Better, they said, to stay dirty and safe. Others, particularly in cities, worried that public bathhouses encouraged sinful behavior. So even when people could bathe, they often chose not to. One quirky historical tidbit: some noblewomen would wear layers of perfume-soaked fabric under their dresses to try to combat the smells. This led to some absolutely wild fashion choices, like carrying elaborate scented fans or tucking flower-filled sachets into sleeves. Did it work? Not really. But it made them feel a little less like they were living in a giant, unwashed armpit. As the morning slips into afternoon, your stomach growls again. But lunch is no feast. More pottage, more hard bread, maybe a thin soup if you're lucky. And yes, more weak beer. Water, remember, is still unsafe. The cycle continues. And as you sit there on a lopsided wooden bench gnawing on a crust of bread, you can't help but notice something. No one here is clean. No one smells fresh. No one looks comfortable. Everyone is bundled in rough wool, chapped skin, and tired eyes. Because this is what life looks like when plumbing doesn't exist. Historians still debate just how aware medieval people were of the risks they faced daily. Did they truly accept that death could come from a single sip of bad water? Or did they live in denial? Some writings from the time suggest a sort of grim acceptancy belief that suffering was simply part of life. Others show real fear, panic during outbreaks, and desperate prayers for protection. But here's the hardest truth of all. For most people, there was no other option. There was no escape. No running water, no toilets, no soap. Just the same endless cycle of dirt, disease, and discomfort. And as you stand up from your meager lunch, wipe your hands on your filthy tunic, and head back toward the fields, you know that before the day is done, you'll have to answer nature's call again. And this time, it might be even worse. Because sometimes, the bucket is already full. The afternoon wears on, and your body starts to ache in new and imaginative ways. Your back is sore from bending, your knees creak with every step, and your hands are stiff from cold and constant work. But somewhere in the back of your mind, there's a familiar dread creeping in. Because sooner or later, you'll have to face it again. The toilet situation. And you're already dreading it. Let's say you're out in the fields when nature calls. There's no public latrine here, no friendly wooden bucket behind the house. So what do? Simple. You find the nearest bush, hedge, or ditch and you go. Right there, in the open air. And honestly, it might actually be better than the alternative. At least there's some fresh air, even if the wind is cold and biting. Of course, there's no toilet paper out here either. So you do what people have done for thousands of years. Grab some leaves, maybe a clump of moss, and hope for the best. It's not exactly hygienic, but hygiene, as we understand it, isn't really a thing in this world. People know that getting too dirty can make you sick, but the link between waste, germs, and disease is still centuries away from being discovered. One quirky detail: some medieval communities had actual laws about where people were allowed to relieve themselves. In some towns, you could be fined for going in the street instead of using a designated waste area. In others, public defecation was just tolerated. After all, there weren't many alternatives. Historians still debate whether these laws were actually enforced or if they were just polite suggestions that no one really followed. But let's shift gears for a moment, because sooner or later, you'll return home. And with any luck, you'll get to use your own humble medieval toiletta simple wooden bucket tucked behind the house or in a dark corner. The problem? It's already full. Again, see, chamber pots and waste buckets didn't empty themselves. Someone had to do it. And unless you're wealthy enough to have servants, which, let's face it, you're not, that someone is you, or your family, or maybe that poor neighbor kid who lost a bet. The waste is gathered up, carried outside, and dumped usually straight into the street or into the nearest cesspit. Now, imagine carrying a sloshing bucket of human waste down a slippery cobbled street. One false step, and, well, let's just say it's not going to be a great day. And speaking of cesspits, let's take a moment to appreciate how truly awful they were. Cesspits were essentially deep holes dug into the ground to collect waste. Some were lined with stone, others just bare earth. Over time, these pits would fill up. And then, someone, usually an unlucky laborer known as a gong farmer, had to climb down inside and shovel out the waste by hand. Yes, by hand. Gong farmers were the unsung heroes of medieval sanitation. Their job was so disgusting, so hazardous, that they were often paid surprisingly well for it. But they were also social outcasts. People avoided them. No one wanted to sit next to the guy who spent his nights knee-deep in human filth. Historians still argue whether these cesspits contributed to the spread of disease or actually helped keep towns cleaner. Some suggest that regular waste removal, however crude, prevented worse outbreaks. Others believe the pits were simply breeding grounds for bacteria and infection. The truth is probably somewhere in between. But what about those who couldn't afford even a cesspit? What about the poorest of the poor? For them, the answer was simple. You dumped your waste wherever you could, out the window, into the street, behind a bush. Over time, the ground itself in medieval towns became saturated with human filth. Archaeological digs in old European cities have revealed layers upon layers of waste-soaked soil beneath the streets. It wasn't just on the ground, it was in it. And then came the rain. When it rained, medieval towns became rivers of sewage. Waste flowed freely through the streets, carrying filth into wells, homes, and marketplaces. Shoes were a necessity not for fashion, but for survival. Stepping barefoot into medieval mud could mean stepping into something far worse. Let's pause for another quirky tidbit. In some towns, people used raised wooden walkways to cross particularly foul streets. These stepping boards were early versions of sidewalks, designed to keep your feet drier, at least less filthy. Did they help? A little. But they didn't solve the core problem. Too many people, too little sanitation. As you finish your day's work, exhausted, you trudge back home. Your hands are raw, your stomach growls. And yes, once again, nature is calling. You're cold, you're hungry, and you're about to face the same grim ritual again. If you're lucky, you'll use the bucket. If not, you'll sneak behind the house. Either way, it's the same miserable experience. And here's the truly wild part. For centuries, this was normal. For peasants, merchants, noblesse, everyone, except the very, very elitists, was life. Dirty, smelly, uncomfortable, and endlessly repetitive. Historians still debate the psychological toll this might have taken. Did people simply stop noticing the discomfort? Did they build mental walls against the stench and the filth? Or did they quietly despair? Some medieval writings hint at resignation, a belief that suffering was just part of God's plan. Others show humor, crude jokes, and laughter in the face of hardship. But you're living it now. One cold, muddy, smelly day at a time. And tomorrow? It starts all over again. The sky darkens as evening creeps in, and with it comes a new set of medieval challenges. But before you can even think about resting your aching limbs, you know what's waiting for you. One last visit to the dreaded toilet, if you can call it that. Because no matter the hour, when nature calls in medieval times, you have to answer. There's no holding it until morning, when your stomach grumbles from days-old pottage and questionable ale. By now, you've grown used to the routine, the cold, the mud, the sheer unpleasantness of the entire ordeal. But nighttime brings extra complications. For one thing, there's no street lighting. No gentle glow of a lantern outside your door. Just darkness. Thick, oppressive, near total darkness. The kind where even the moon can't always guide your steps. If you're lucky enough to have a candle, or better yet, a simple oil lamp, you might be able to navigate your way to the family bucket or the alley behind your house. But for most people, you rely on memory and feel, stepping carefully along worn paths, hoping you don't trip over something or someone. And here's where things get really medieval. Accidents happen. A lot. Chamber pots spill, buckets tip. Streets are slippery with more than just rain. One quirky fact: in some wealthier homes, people kept small wooden stools with holes, basically portable toilets that they could use without having to venture outdoors. These were sometimes called close stools and were seen as a great luxury. But even so, the waste still had to be emptied somewhere. The chambermaid, or unlucky servant, was responsible for disposing of it, usually right back into the same grimy cesspits or streets. Historians still argue over whether nighttime sanitation was more dangerous than daytime. Some believe the risk of falls, injuries, or even criminal attacks made nighttime trips to the latrine particularly hazardous. Others suggest that people avoided nighttime excursions altogether by restricting their eating and drinking in the evening. Either way, you in this medieval sky didn't have many choices. So let's imagine you fumble in the dark, clutching your thin cloak against the cold, and make your way to the outhouse, or, more likely, just the back alley. The smell hits you before you get there. Rotting waste, old straw, something worse that you can't quite identify. You do what you must, as quickly as possible, and shuffle back to your wooden hut, your bare feet numb and filthy. And now, finally, it's time to relax. If you're imagining cozy beds with warm blankets, think again. Your bed is still that same pile of straw, damp from the day's chill, full of fleas and lice. The blanket is coarse wool, scratchy, and heavy. And the air inside your home? Stale, smoky, and freezing cold. The only warmth comes from the hearth if you are lucky enough to have any firewood left. Here's a curious historical detail. Some medieval families actually shared beds not out of affection, but out of necessity. Body heat was the only reliable source of warmth. Parents, children, even distant relatives might all pile into the same bed. Privacy? Forget it. There was none. If you needed to use the chamber pot in the night, everyone heard it and smelled it, and probably rolled over and tried to ignore it. And what about personal hygiene? Surely you can at least wash your hands after using the toilet, right? Well, maybe. Maybe not. In medieval times, hand washing wasn't seen as essential the way it is today. While some wealthier homes had basins and jugs of water for washing, many peasants simply wiped their hands on their clothes or on whatever rags were lying around. Soap was expensive and often homemade from animal fat and ash, and it wasn't used nearly as often as you'd hope. The idea of invisible germs simply didn't exist. Historians still debate how often medieval people washed their hands. Some suggest that hand washing before meals was a common practice among the upper classes, especially when eating with others. Others argue that for the lower classes, cleanliness was a distant luxury, rarely practiced. What we do know is this. Bad hygiene wasn't just a risk, it was deadly. With no understanding of bacteria, medieval people were vulnerable to outbreaks of plague, cholera, and typhoid. And your exposure to human waste through streets, food, water, and unwashed hands only made the danger worse. But enough of the grim facts. Let's pause for a lighter medieval oddity. In some parts of Europe, people believed that if you whispered a secret while sitting on the toilet, it would come true. Others thought that relieving yourself at certain sacred places could bring good luck or fertility. Strange? Absolutely. But in a world where life was short and hardship was constant, people clung to whatever small comforts or superstitions they could find. As you lie back on your lumpy straw mattress, the cold biting at your nose, you realize something sobering. This is as good as it gets. There's no bath waiting for you tomorrow, no flush toilet, no cozy bedroom, just the same cycle, day after day, of dirt, discomfort, and the endless struggle to stay alive in a world that seems determined to break you. And yet, people survived. Somehow. The wind howls outside, the rats scurry in the rafters. Somewhere in the distance, the church bell tolls midnight. And you, wrapped in your scratchy blanket, close your eyes and drift into uneasy sleep. Tomorrow, it all begins again. The first pale light of dawn creeps through the cracks in the wooden slats of your hut. It's not much of a sunrise, just a faint gray glow that tells you another cold, damp medieval day has begun. And before you can even think about stretching your aching limbs, the familiar sensation of discomfort stirs in your belly. That's right, it's time once again to face the unavoidable misery of medieval toileting. By now, you've stopped being surprised by how many times in one day you have to confront this grim ritual. The limited, monotonous diet of pottage and weak ale, combined with stress, cold, and poor hygiene, means your digestive system islets say and predictable. The toilet, or whatever passes for one in your world, is never far from your thoughts. And today, to make matters worse, it's raining. Not a gentle spring shower, but a cold, relentless drizzle that turns every pathway into sticky mud and every corner into a treacherous slip hazard. Your shoe sore, the closest thing you have to shoe air soaked through within minutes of stepping outside. Your cloak does little to keep out the chill, and the only thing heavier than the wet wool is the weight of your own frustration. In towns and villages, the problem of sanitation is compounded by the sheer number of people packed into tight, narrow streets. Waste from hundreds of households mixes in the gutters, flowing down toward the nearest river or stagnant ditch. Every puddle could be hiding something unpleasant, and the air itself carries the thick, sour scent of decay. You trudge toward the communal latrine, or perhaps just the same old bucket behind your dwelling, doing your best to avoid the worst of the muck. Some towns tried to regulate this chaos. Medieval London, for example, had rudimentary waste management rules and even paid workers to clean the streets. But enforcement was sporadic, and the volume of waste always outpaced efforts to contain it. Historians still argue about the effectiveness of these early sanitation systems. Some believe they were surprisingly sophisticated for their time. Others point out the regular outbreaks of disease as evidence of their failure. Either way, you're not concerned with the academic debate. You're too busy trying not to slip and fall face first into the medieval equivalent of a sewage river. And just when you think it can't get worse as surprise it does, because now, as you crouch behind a crumbling wall or perch on the edge of a rough-hewn latrine, you're not alone. Flies buzz insistently, drawn to the scent of waste. Rats scurry nearby, bold and unafraid. And there's always the chance that another villager might wander by, offering an awkward nod or simply ignoring your presence entirely. In this world, privacy is a myth, and dignity is optional. Let's take a quick detour into one of the strangest quirks of medieval toileting, the phenomenon of night soil men. These were individuals, often poor laborers, who made their living by collecting human waste from cesspits and chamber pots. They would then sell this waste as fertilizer to farmers. Yes, you heard that right. Waste was a commodity. In a time when nothing could be wasted, even the most disgusting byproducts of daily life found a market. Of course, this practice wasn't without risk. Handling waste exposed these workers to all kinds of diseases, and the stench, unimaginable. Many night soil men were shunned by society, regarded as unclean and barely better than the waste they carried. But for some, the coin was worth it. After all, when you live in a world where starvation is always just around the corner, even the filthiest job can mean survival. As you finish your grim task and shuffle back home, the rain still falling, you pass by other villagers engaged in their own daily struggles. A woman hauling water from a distant well, a child chasing a stray chicken through the mud, an elderly man coughing into his sleeve, the sound wet and ominous. Life in medieval times is a constant parade of discomforts, indignities, and quiet battles against the elements. Back inside your dwelling, you strip off your sodden outer layer and sit near the meager fire. If you're lucky, someone has managed to keep a few embers alive overnight, and the faint warmth helps chase the chill from your bones. But the smoke stings your eyes, and the air is thick with dampness. Your clothes, your bedding, even the very walls seem to radiate cold. At this point, you might be wondering, did medieval people ever bathe? And the answer is, sometimes. Bathing wasn't entirely unheard of, but it was rare, especially for the poor. Soap was expensive. Heated water required precious firewood. And without indoor plumbing, even the simplest bath meant hauling heavy buckets of water by hand. For most people, a full-body wash was an event something reserved for special occasions, holy days, or desperate necessity. And what about dental hygiene? Surely you can at least brush your teeth after a day. Like this, right? Well, not really. Toothbrushes didn't exist in medieval Europe. Some people used cloths to rub their teeth. Others chewed herbs or sticks to freshen their breath. But cavities, gum disease, and toothaches were incredibly common. Painful extractions without anesthetic were the standard treatment. Historians still debate how much people cared about their own hygiene. Some evidence suggests that medieval people did take pride in cleanliness when they could afford it. Others argue that survival came first, and things like bathing and tooth care were distant concerns. What is certain is that for the average peasant, life was dirty, and not just physically, but in every sensory detail. The sights, the smells, the constant discomfort. As the day wears on, your body heavy with fatigue, you can't help but reflect on the sheer relentlessness of it all. There's no break from the hardship, no weekends, no vacations, just the endless cycle of labor, discomfort, and bodily needs in a world without modern conveniences. And yet, people survived. Generations lived and died under these conditions, carving out lives, families, and communities despite the filth and hardship. And now, in this bedtime journey through the past, you've taken your place among them, if only for a little while. You pull your scratchy blanket over your shoulders, the fire flickering low, and listen to the soft patter of rain on the thatched roof. Another day ends. Tomorrow, the cycle continues. The rooster hasn't even crowed yet, but your body stirs, aching from the cold night and the stiff, flea-ridden straw beneath you. Dawn is still a pale suggestion on the horizon. You blink groggily and inhale air thick with wood smoke, old sweat, and something far less pleasant a pungent reminder that in medieval times, even sleep isn't a true escape from the realities of daily life. And yes, once again, nature calls. You sigh. There's no avoiding it. You shuffle from your cramped bedding, careful not to wake the other siblings, cousins, maybe even livestock sharing the space and pull on your damp, rough woolen tunic. Your breath fogs in the chill, and your bare feet sink into the cold dirt floor. Every step is familiar, past the creaky door, past the stacked firewood, out into the dim, muddy street. The communal waste still lingers from the previous day. It always does. Gutters overflow with slush that's equal parts rainwater, rotting refuse, and worse. The smell hangs in the air like a curse. It's not just disgusting, it's dangerous. People fall ill regularly, and not just from the cold. You know, deep down, that the very air and ground you walk on carry invisible threats. Historians still argue whether medieval towns were death traps by design or by necessity. Some point to attempts at rudimentary sanitation. Others insist the sheer density of people, animals, and waste made sickness inevitable. Either way, it doesn't change your morning task. You reach your usual spot, a battered wooden bucket tucked behind a crooked wall. It's overflowing again. The last person clearly didn't bother to empty it, or maybe they had nowhere to dump it. You consider your options, hold it in, and suffer all day or face the filth. There's not much choice. You do what must be done, gagging slightly, eyes watering in the icy air. One odd historical detail. In some towns, waste was actually used to create night soil for fields. It was an early form of recycling, though certainly not a glamorous one. Of course, for you, this knowledge is small comfort. The smell still burns your nose, and the cold still bites through your skin. Back inside, you set about the day's next miserable task. Breakfast. Forget fresh eggs or golden toast. It's pottage again. The same unidentifiable stew of grains and whatever scraps can be found. It's thick, lumpy, and tastes like sadness. The bread, if you're lucky enough to have any, is as hard as stone. You chew slowly, jaw aching, and wash it down with weak ale because the water remains undrinkable. And you can't help but notice the grime. Dirt under your nails, grease in your hair, the film of smoke clinging to your skin. Bathing? Laughable. You know it's something that happens once, maybe twice a season. The idea of soap-reel soap is a distant dream, reserved for nobles and monasteries. For you, cleanliness is wiping your hands on your tunic and calling it good enough. It's no wonder that disease runs rampant. Lice, fleas, infections all part of the daily package. And when something worse strikes a fever, a cough, you know, your chances of survival are slim. Medical care is primitive at best. Leeches, herbal poultices, superstitions. Most of the time, you simply endure or you don't. Historians still debate how aware medieval people were of the links between hygiene and health. Some records suggest a surprising level of cleanliness among certain communities, while others paint a bleaker picture of near-total filth. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in between. After the grim meal, you head to your day's labor. Perhaps you're a farmer, slogging through muddy fields. Perhaps you weave cloth, tan hides, or haul heavy loads for the local lord. Whatever your trade, your body is constantly battered. Blisters, bruises, and bone-deep exhaustion are part of the routine. The physicality of life in the Middle Ages is relentless. And through it all, the labor, the aches, the endless repetition, there's the constant, low-level discomfort of your body's needs and the lack of any civilized way to meet them. The memory of the morning's toilet visit lingers. You know, you'll face it again before the sun sets. A quirky belief from the time. Some people carried amulets or charms to ward off illness believed to arise from foul smells. The miasma theory that bad air caused disease was widely accepted, so people clutched sprigs of herbs or wore sachets of dried flowers around their necks. It didn't help, of course, but it gave them something to believe in. And in this bleak world, belief matters. Whether it's faith in God, in magic, or in the healing power of a lavender sprig, people cling to small comforts in the face of daily hardship. As the day drags on, your thoughts drift to rest. But even that, comes with its own discomforts. The thought of that straw bed, the smoky air, the scratchy blanket, it's not exactly inviting. But you're tired, so tired. You finish your work, stomach growling, muscles aching, and you trudge home through streets that ooze with waste and filth. And once again, before you can sleep, you face the same grim necessity. The nighttime toilet visit. It's the cycle you can't escape. Day after day, night after night. Filth, discomfort, survival. The medieval world doesn't give you a break. And as you collapse onto the straw once more, you wonder did anyone endure this? And yet, somehow, they did. And, so do you. You wake before dawn again, your breath visible in the icy air of your one-room hut. The straw mattress beneath you crunches as you shift, sending a puff of dust and ancient grime into the dark air. Your muscles ache, your bones creak, every joint complains. But the sharpest reminder that you're alive in medieval Europe is the pressing need in your belly, the inescapable fact that, once again, it's time to face the medieval toilet. You sigh heavily. There's no glamour here. No comfortable porcelain, no gentle toilet paper, no fragrant air freshener. Just the same grim choice you face every day. The overflowing bucket, the communal latrine, or if you're desperate, the edge of a field. None of them pleasant. None of them private, and all of them disgusting. As you shuffle outside, wrapping your threadbare cloak tighter, the village is silent but not still. The smell of damp earth, wood smoke, and waste hangs thick in the air. The gutter streams of filth from dozens of homes mingle in the narrow, twisting streets. Slippery mud, splintered wood, patches of straw, and human and animal waste create a treacherous landscape. Every footstep is calculated, every breath shallow. The town's so-called sanitation system is laughably primitive. Historians still debate whether medieval waste disposal was disastrously negligent or simply the best possible for the time. The truth? You don't care. All you know is that it stinks, it's dangerous, and you hate every second of it. Today, you choose the communal latrinia rickety wooden structure perched over a pit that may or may not collapse under your weight. You can hear the squelch of wet straw beneath your feet as you approach, and you try not to gag. Flies buzz lazily even in the cold air, drawn by the unspeakable scent. You do your business as quickly as possible, avoiding eye contact with the unlucky soul seated nearby, their face as miserable as your own. A quirky but true historical tidbit. Medieval nobles occasionally built their own private guardrobes directly into castle walls with waste dropping into the moat below. Sounds like luxury, right? Except enemies sometimes use these waste chutes as secret entrances during sieges. Imagine being attacked by someone crawling through your toilet. It's both horrifying and darkly hilarious. The latrine visit leaves you shivering and sour. Back inside your hovel, you warm your numb fingers near the flickering hearth. Breakfast is the usual grim affair: pottage, rock, hard bread, and watered-down ale. No choice, no variety, just the same thin gruel day after day. You eat because you must, not because you want to. And then the day's work begins. Labor is life. You haul wood, plow fields, carry water your hands blistered, your back bent. And as you toil, the discomfort in your body grows. You're cold, you're damp, and worst of all, you're unclean. Always unclean. Bathing? Almost mythical. Soap? A rare luxury. Most medieval people washed their hands and faces occasionally, but full-body baths were events reserved for the wealthy or for moments of desperation. Water had to be hauled and heated by hand. Even public bathhouse popular in some cities were expensive and, over time, associated with disease or sin. So the dirt clings to you, the stink clings to you, and the cycle continues. Historians still argue how much people cared about this filth. Some evidence shows medieval peasants valued cleanliness when possible. Other sources suggest most had no real choice. Disease was rampant, wounds festered. Plague, dysentery, fevers, these were constants. You know them not as distant threats, but as everyday companions. By midday, you're soaked in sweat despite the cold. Your stomach growls, but you push on. The thought of another visit to the latrine, later another humiliating shuffle into the mirelingers at the back of your mind like a dark cloud, you know it's coming. And so the hours grind past. Labor, cold, hunger, dirt. Evening arrives, and with it, your thin, joyless supper. The hearth flickers weakly. The wind howls outside. You huddle close to the warmth, sharing what little comfort you can with family and neighbors. And then once again, nature calls. The nighttime trip is worse. The cold bites sharper. The mud is thicker. Every breath stings your lungs. And yet, you trudge on because you must. The latrine, the bucket, the hedge at the village edge, it doesn't matter. The result is always the same: discomfort, disgust, and the lingering stench that you can never fully escape. A strange medieval belief. Some people thought that bad smells the miasma cold carry disease. They weren't entirely wrong, though they had no knowledge of bacteria or viruses. To combat this, villagers sometimes carried sweet herbs or wore scented cloths over their faces. You consider this as you shiver in the darkness, but you have no herbs, no protection. Only the filth, the cold, and the endless repetition. And when you finally collapse into your straw bed, exhausted beyond words, the only comfort you find is in the heavy stillness of sleep. Even as the fleas bite and the wind howls, sleep is your only refuge. Tomorrow, the same. The toilet, the mud, the filth, the life you cannot escape. And somehow, impossibly, you endure. The icy dawn seeps through the cracks of your wooden hovel once more, waking you before the roosters crow. Your body aches in all the usual places: knees, back, neck itch joint, stiff from another night on the flea-riddled straw mattress. The bitter cold has numbed your fingers, but one thing remains all too present: that familiar, urgent need. You sigh, knowing exactly what must come next. It's time again for the medieval toilet ritual. Dragging yourself upright, you pull your rough woolen tunic over your head, shivering as the cold cloth slaps against your skin. Your breath forms small clouds as you shuffle toward the creaky door. Outside, the village lies silent under the pale gray light. The only sounds the soft snorts of animals and the distant caw of crows. Your feet hit the muddy path, every step sinking slightly into a foul mixture of rain, waste, and rotting straw. The stench assaults your senses before you even reach the latrine. It's not just food that's overwhelming. The streets are still slick with yesterday's filth, and with no real drainage system, everything just sits, stews, and seeps into the earth beneath your bare feet. Historians still debate how common public latrines were across medieval Europe. Some towns maintained shared privies over cesspits. Others left waste disposal entirely to individual households. Either way, the result was often the same: streets running with human and animal waste, disease spreading without mercy. You reach the makeshift latrine a little more than planks over a pit. The wooden seat is slick with moisture and cold as ice. You balance yourself as best you can, teeth gritted against the stench. Flies swarm, undeterred by the chill. There's no privacy, no dignity, only the necessity of the act. A strange medieval belief floats to mind. It was once thought that evil spirits could enter the body during such vulnerable moments. Some even carried talismans or whispered protective prayers while relieving themselves. You find yourself almost tempted to do the same. So unnerving is the bleak discomfort of this moment. Finished, you make the slow, careful trek back inside, your breath quick and shallow, eager to escape the bitter air. You scrape your boots clean on the doorframe, though the mud and filth cling stubbornly. Your hands, cold and unwashed, tremble slightly as you kneel near the hearth. The fire is little more than glowing embers, barely enough to take the edge off the morning frost. Breakfast, if it can be called, that is the same as ever. A bowl of pottage so grey and lumpy it looks like something dredged from the bottom of a bog. You choke down a few mouthfuls alongside a sip of weak ale. The bread is hot enough to crack teeth, but you gnaw it dutifully, hunger outweighing discomfort. Quirky fact. In some medieval towns, bread was so coarse it contained bits of grit from the grinding stones. Eating bread literally wore down your teeth over time. You think about this as you chew carefully, jaw already sore from days, weeks, months of the same brutal routine. The day stretches before you long, grim and filled with labor. Hauling, chopping, digging your hands are blistered and cracked, your muscles tight and sore. You wipe sweat from your brow with the sleeve of your tunic, only to smear more grime across your skin. Cleanliness remains a distant dream. Bathing? Forget it. The sheer effort of drawing water, heating it, and finding a private place to wash makes the idea almost laughable. Some villagers go entire seasons without a proper bath. And as the wind shifts, you catch your own sour odor, sweat, wood smoke, and the unmistakable tang of human waste. Historians still argue about how common bathing actually was in medieval times. While some wealthier classes had access to bathhouses or private tubs, the average peasant like you relied on occasional face washing and prayers that the cold would mask the worst of the smells. The truth lies somewhere between filth and folklore. By midday, the pressure in your belly reminds you, it's time again. A second visit to the latrine. The humiliation of it, the dirt, the stench, the exposure never gets easier. You trudge through the muck, head down, breath held. Each step feels heavier than the last. And so the day drags on. Labor, hunger, cold, and always, always the background misery of your own unwashed body, your unrelenting discomfort, your dependence on medieval sanitation that barely deserves the name. Evening arrives. Thin soup, stale bread. The fire flickers as darkness swallows the village. You huddle near the fading warmth, shivering beneath your thin blanket. Your feet ache. Your skin itches from dirt and fleas. And before you can finally collapse into restless sleep, you know you'll have to make that final trip. The nighttime toilet visit. It's worse in the dark. The mud is slicker. The cold cuts deeper. The fear of what might lurk rats, thieves, or worse sins shivers through your bones. The icy dawn doesn't ask for your permission. It simply arrives, seeping through the cracks of your hut, biting at your fingertips, freezing your breath in the air before you even open your eyes. Your body resists every movement. Joints swollen, muscles sore, skin itchy from the layer of grime that never seems to leave, no matter how hard you rub at it. But the most pressing issue, the one that forces you up despite the pain, is once again the ancient, timeless, and deeply unpleasant call of nature. You sit up slowly. The straw mattress crackles beneath you, dust rising like a sad little cloud. Every motion is stiff, your bones sounding like someone crushing dry twigs. You glance around the dark, cramped room shadows of your sleeping family, animals huddled close for warmth, and the heavy scent of unwashed bodies, smoke, and damp earth hanging thick in the air. The familiar dread settles in your stomach. Another trip outside, another brush with medieval sanitation, or what passes for it. You wrap your threadbare cloak tighter, shivering as you step out into the sludge. The ground squelches beneath your feet. Even through your worn boots, the chill of the mud sends an ache through your bones. The smell hits instantly. Stagnant, rotting, overpowering. Waste flows down the narrow lanes, mixing with rain and filth. No matter how many times you see it, it never feels normal. Historians still argue whether medieval sanitation was outright neglect or simply the best option available in the absence of modern engineering. Some towns had rudimentary drainage systems, but most places had you right now trudging toward a communal latrine that smells worse than any nightmare. The pit is half frozen this morning, the wooden boards slick with frost. You try not to slip as you position yourself, breathing through your mouth to avoid the worst of the stench. It's quiet out here. save for the distant call of crows and the soft rustle of wind. Even the flies seem too cold to bother today. And yet, despite the misery, there are strange comforts, a kind of numb acceptance. The fact that everyone shares the same fate, the rich, the poor, the pious, the sinner, everyone needs to answer this call. Everyone, sooner or later, must face the filth. A quirky medieval belief drifts to mind. Some claim that witches and devils lurked near cesspits, feeding on human waste or using it for dark magic. It's almost believable in this setting. The latrine feels cursed, shadowed, haunted in a way that goes beyond the merely physical. You finish quickly and retreat back inside, stamping the mud from your boots, shivering as the wind whips at your face. The hearth is still smoldering. You kneel before it, teeth chattering, pulling your hands close to the meager warmth. Breakfast, if you can call it that, is once again the unchanging pottage. Thick, bland, gritty. The bread is stale and dense, and the weak ale washes it down like liquid sadness. There's no pleasure in eating, only the dull necessity of fueling the body so it can endure another day. And endure you must. Labor waits. Heavy, punishing, ceaseless labor. Fields to plow, water to haul, wood to chop. Your hands blister, your skin cracks, your back bends until the pain is just part of you. Dirt grinds into every crease of your skin. The sun barely warms you. Your breath clouds the air even at midday. Bathing? Unthinkable. The effort, the resources too great for people like you. Your skin remains caked in grime, your hair thick with grease and dust. Lice are an everyday nuisance. Sores and rashes appear, fade, and return in endless cycles. Historians still debate the real frequency of medieval bathing. Some records suggest people washed more often than stereotypes suggest, particularly in southern Europe. Others insist that for the majority peasants like you, weeks, or even months, could pass without a full body wash. Regardless, you feel the weight of that dirt every second. Midday brings no relief. Another visit to the latrine, another humiliation. You dread it, but the alternative holding it in leads to worse outcomes. Sickness, unbearable pain, even death. So you trudge. Always trudge. A strange belief still whispered among villagers. That sudden illness could be caused by night air, a dangerous vapor that struck without warning. Some believe that relieving yourself too often or at the wrong time could invite death. And yet, necessity overrides superstition. You go because you must. Evening approaches. The light fades, shadows grow. Supper is as dismal as breakfast. The fire burns lower. The cold creeps in. Your limbs are heavy, your stomach half empty, and still you know the final humiliation awaits. The nighttime toilet trip. This time you carry a stub of a candle, the flickering flame barely enough to light the path. The mud is slicker now, the air sharper. You move slowly, heart pounding, every crack of a branch or scurry of an unseen creature setting you nerves on edge. Some nights, people vanish in the dark. Wolves, thieves, or worse. But you survive. You always survive. You return, heart still racing, and collapse onto the filthy straw. Your breath slows. The chill settles deep into your bones. Sleep drifts near, offering brief escape from the endless cycle. And as your eyes close, you already know. Tomorrow, it all begins again. The cold creeps into your bones before your eyes even open. The familiar heaviness settles over you, the weight of the wool blanket, the ache in your joints, and that all too familiar pressure in your gut. Another day. Another inevitable encounter with the medieval toilet. You push yourself upright, the straw mattress groaning beneath your weight. Dust and old straw scatter into the air. Around you, the dog shape of your family stirs no privacy, no personal space, just shared survival. Your breath clouds in the frozen air. Your nose is numb, your fingers barely bend. And yet, before anything else, you know exactly what you have to do. The early morning path outside is worse today. Rain from the night before has turned the narrow lanes into pure sludge. Your boots sink deep with each step. Filth splashes up your legs. The foul, odor-soaked earth, rotting waste, and that unmistakable stench of human and animal excrement hits you like a slap. You pull your cloak tighter and trudge on. Historians still argue whether medieval towns genuinely tried to manage waste or simply gave up. Some cities did attempt primitive sewage channels, but most rural villages were exactly like this: open, fetid, and perilous. A place where stepping outside meant stepping into sickness. The communal latrine looms ahead leaning, half-rotted wood perched over a pit that's nearly overflowing. The flies swarm lazily. The boards creak ominously beneath your feet. There's no comfort here, no relief. Just the grim necessity of squatting in the cold, surrounded by the filth of your neighbors and ancestors. A quirky historical tidbit crosses your mind. Some medieval people believed that evil spirits dwelled in latrines. In castles, they even carved toilet demons into the stone near guardrobes, hoping to ward off supernatural mischief while doing their business. You shudder not from ghosts, but from the cold that's seeping into your bones. Finished, you make your way back, every step careful and miserable. You scrape your boots against the threshold, though it barely helps. The filth clings. It always clings. Inside, the hearth is little more than dying embers. You huddle near it, hands trembling. Your breath still mists the air. Someone stirs the pot of potagia gluey mess of barley, roots, and something unidentifiable. The bread is rock hard. The ale is flat and sour. You chew, you swallow, you endure. This isn't a meal, it's fuel. Enough to keep your limbs moving through another day of labor. And the labor comes. Always. You haul water, you chop wood, you dig, you lift, you ache. The cold never quite leaves. The grime never washes away. The fleas nibble at your ankles. The dirt under your nails is permanent. And the thought never quite leaves your mind. Soon, you'll need to go again. Soon, the next trip to the toilet will come. Bathing? Laughable. Most villagers like you will go months without so much as a proper scrub. There's no time, no resources, and no belief that it's necessary. Some say that washing too often weakens the body, makes you vulnerable to sickness. Others just can't be bothered when survival already takes everything. Historians still debate how dirty medieval peasants really were. Some evidence shows that they washed more often than we assume, especially hands and faces. Others insist the filth was truly all-consuming, especially in winter when water froze and bathing was impossible. You live the answer firsthand, and it isn't pretty. By midday, your stomach knots again. The pottage has done its work. You steel yourself for another trip, another shuffle through the filth, another awkward, humiliating visit to the latrine. The smell has somehow worsened. The mud is deeper. The sense of dignity, what little is, left slips further away. Another strange belief. Some villagers think that every time you empty yourself, you lose a part of your life force. There are even whispered rumors of cursed toilets that steal more than just waste. You smirk bitterly at the thought, as if life here wasn't grim enough. The afternoon drags. The work drains you, the cold gnaws at your fingers. Your stomach rumbles again, not from illness, but from the eternal scarcity. Food is never enough. Rest is never enough. And comfort doesn't exist. Evening falls, and the chill deepens. Supper is thin and joyless. The fire burns low. And yes again, before you can sleep, before you can escape into the haze of dreams, the final toilet visit calls. You wrap yourself tightly, clutch a stub of waxy candle, and step once more into the darkness. The mud squelches. The shadows seem alive. Every creak, every rustle makes your heart race. But you survive. You always survive. Back inside, the familiar straw embraces you once more. The stench, the cold, the exhaustion all still here. You drift towards sleep, knowing full well what tomorrow holds. The cycle never ends. The morning mist clings to the cobbled streets like a damp shroud. You are awake again, and once more you feel the familiar, unwelcome nudge of your bladder, reminding you that no matter how cold, how dark, how miserable the world outside may be, nature refuses to wait. So you groan softly, pull your ragged cloak tighter, and begin the slow, reluctant journey out of your hovel and into the unforgiving dawn of medieval life. This time, as you trudge through the sticky sludge of the main road, something catches your attention. A new pile of waste, human, animal, or otherwise, has appeared since last night. You step carefully, though it's nearly impossible to avoid everything. The streets of your medieval village are, quite literally, open sewers. And yet, believe it or not, there were laws, medieval laws. Actual attempts to manage the endless tide of filth that surrounded daily life. Historians still debate whether these laws were created out of genuine concern for public health or just because even the wealthiest villagers were sick of stepping in human excrement every morning. One of the earliest records of waste regulations dates back to 14th century England. Town councils issued decrees that forbade the dumping of night soil into the streets during daylight hours. The key word there? Daylight. Nighttime was apparently fair game. So if you needed to dump your chamber pot at noon, illegal. Midnight? Perfectly fine. You sigh, pausing beside a sagging timber-framed house as you remember the phrase garde-loup. It's the old warning cry derived from the French gare de l'eau that people were supposed to shout before tossing their waste out of upper-story windows. Theoretically, it gave pedestrians below a chance to dodge. In practice, well, let's just say you keep your hood up and your eyes down whenever you pass under a window. Your feet crunch over broken straw and patches of unidentifiable sludge. Somewhere nearby, you hear the soft splash of waste being poured from a bucket. The scent hits almost instantly. It's a miasma, sour, sharp, organic. You breathe through your mouth. It doesn't help much. A strange and almost humorous fact comes to mind. In some medieval towns, offenders caught dumping waste improperly could face public punishment. Fines, yes, but also stocks, whippings, or even temporary banishment. Imagine that. You're hauled before the town elders, not for stealing or fighting, but for throwing your own filth in the wrong place at the wrong time. The Middle Ages had a deeply strange sense of justice. You reach the communal latrine still there, still reeking, still a nightmare. The wooden boards creak beneath your weight. You crouch, shivering, as you do what must be done. The freezing wind bites your exposed skin. The smell is overwhelming. And in that miserable moment, you think about how little real change the cleanliness laws brought to everyday life. Historians still argue whether medieval sanitation laws were actually enforced, or whether they existed mostly on paper aspirational rather than practical. Some towns, like London, made attempts to dig cesspits and create drainage ditches. But without modern engineering, it was never enough. The streets always filled again. A quirky historical tidbit floats through your mind. In Paris, some medieval homes were even required by law to install gargoyles or spouts to direct waste away from buildings. The earliest plumbing of sorts, though, instead of water, it carried filth. You shudder. Your business finished, you rise carefully, pulling your cloak tight as you begin the muddy walk back. The village stirs around you. Merchants set up wooden stalls. Farmers herd reluctant goats down the main lane. Children dart past, barefoot, laughing in defiance of the cold. But the waste is always there. Even in bustling market squares, even beside churches, the filth waits. Medieval life is never far from its smells, its stains, its unavoidable grime. Breakfast is another grim affair. The same lump of cold, chewy bread, the same gluey pottage, the same weak, sour ale. You chew slowly, barely tasting anything, your mind already dreading the next inevitable journey to the latrine. The endless cycle continues. Later, as the sun rises higher, the village elders gather in the square. Someone's been accused again of violating waste disposal laws. The man pleads his case, swearing he followed the rules. The crowd watches with mild interest, shuffling in the mud, hands in pockets. Punishment, if any, will be symbolic. No one truly expects the streets to stay clean. You work the day as always hauling, chopping, lifting your muscles aching, your breath misting in the chill. But your thoughts drift. How strange that even in a world this filthy, people tried to make rules, tried to find order in the chaos. It's almost human, you think. The eternal struggle against the inevitable. Evening falls, and with it, another cold walk through the darkness. Another visit to the latrine. The cold is sharper now, the shadows deeper, but you survive. You always survive. And as you finally collapse onto your straw bed, your breath soft in the still air, you wonder, centuries from now, will people look back at this time and shudder? Will they laugh at the filth, the laws, the hopelessness? Or will they understand that, in the end, you did the best you could in a world without plumbing? The wind howls outside. The embers fade. Sleep pulls you under. The day drags on, and as you wipe the sweat from your brow, despite the cold, you catch yourself stepping around yet another foul puddle in the street. The waste is everywhere, in the gutters, in the corners, pooling in the uneven cobbles of the road. And yet, believe it or not, you're living in a time when people have actually tried to make things cleaner. You wouldn't think so by looking at the street you're walking down. Mud mixed with animal droppings, food scraps, and yes, human waste squelches beneath your worn boots. But medieval towns weren't completely lawless when it came to hygiene. In fact, you might be surprised to learn that by the 13th and 14th centuries, some cities had already begun passing waste disposal laws. Historians still argue over how effective these laws truly were. Some suggest that local officials made sincere efforts to control the chaos. Others believe the rules were little more than wishful thinking, ignored by citizens too busy with survival to worry about where their refuse landed. You keep walking, careful to avoid a slippery patch near a baker's stall. Above you, on the upper floor of a timbered house, a woman empties a chamber pot. She shouts the traditional warning, "Gardaloo!" but barely gives anyone time to react. The liquid splashes onto the cobbles. You grimace. You always grimace. It never gets easier. A quirky tidbit crosses your mind. Some medieval towns actually employed official street cleaners known as rakers, whose job was to remove the worst of the waste. But the rakers were few, the filth was endless, and most people were unwilling to pay the extra taxes needed to fund proper sanitation. The law, in theory, said you weren't supposed to dump waste directly onto the street. Instead, you were supposed to carry it to designated pits or rivers, or at least throw it into a drainage ditch. But reality? Reality was messier. In poor neighborhoods like yours, people barely had time to feed themselves, let alone follow waste laws. There were even fine-chevy ones in some towns for improper dumping. If you were caught emptying your bucket in the wrong place, you might be fined, or worse, dragged before the town elders for public shaming. There are even stories of people being put in the stocks for repeat offenses, left for hours while passers-by pelted them with whatever was at hand, which, in this world, could mean just about anything. As you reach the far edge of the village, the smell of waste mingles with smoke from distant cook fires. You stop, your hands on your hips, and think about the impossibility of keeping a place like this clean. It's not just the lack of toilets, it's the lack of water, the lack of knowledge, and most of all, the lack of time. When survival is your full-time job, cleanliness is a luxury no one can afford. Historians still debate whether medieval people understood the connection between waste and disease. Some scholars argue that people knew bad air or miasma could cause sickness, but they didn't understand the role of bacteria or germs. Others suggest that the stench alone was reason enough to avoid filth when possible. Either way, the knowledge was incomplete, and the plagues that swept through these streets later would prove it. You sigh, your breath clouding in the air, and make your way back toward the center of the village. The streets seem narrower now, the houses more crooked, the shadows longer. You step aside as a cart passes, its wooden wheels splashing filth onto your cloak. Another ordinary day. And yet, somewhere deep inside you, you can't help but marvel. For all its filth and failure, this society tried. The first glimmers of public health policy were born here, in these mud-soaked lanes. It would take centuries, many centuries, but the first steps were already being taken. You reach your door, scrape the worst of the grime off your boots, and step inside. The smell is familiar. Wood smoke, sweat, damp straw, and you saw something worse. The fire burns low, the pottage simmers, and you settle onto your scratchy bed of straw, knowing that tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that, the cycle will repeat. But somewhere far in the future, someone with real toilets, hot baths, and clean streets will look back at this life, and they'll be grateful. You pull your cloak tighter as you leave the relative filth of the castle's moat behind. The bitter wind cuts through the layers of your rough-spun wool, and the air heavy with the scent of rotting refuse-ecklings to your skin. Welcome back to the village, where things aren't much cleaner, just smaller in scale. But even here, amidst the medieval mire, something surprising happened. People, centuries before the discovery of germs, tried to fight back against the filth. Yes, believe it or not, medieval towns actually had laws about waste. You squint down the muddy street as you trudge carefully, your boots squelching through a sludge of mud, manure, and worse. Historians still argue whether these early sanitation rules were actually followed or simply ignored, but written, they were reached into the dusty parchments of city councils and town records. The rules were simple, on paper at least. Don't dump your chamber pot contents into the street during daylight hours. Don't toss human waste near public wells. Don't let your animals roam freely to add to the problem. You can almost laugh. These laws were the medieval equivalent of don't litter signs. In a world without proper bins, without drains, without any real way to dispose of anything. As you walk, the smell shifts from acrid to sour to something you can't even describe. Above you, from a crooked, timber-framed house, a woman opens a wooden shutter. She tips the contents of a bucket into the street below. No warning cry this time. No guardrobes, just a wet splash and a resigned shrug. The rules, you see, were easy to write but impossible to enforce. A stray dog noses through the filth. Children skip past, barefoot, somehow immune to the grime clinging to every surface. And you wonder, who were these lawmakers? What made them think they could tame the unstoppable tide of human waste? The answer, as you know, is necessity. Some of the earliest waste laws came from the sheer desperation of urban life. In London, in York, in Paris, city leaders knew that waste in the streets wasn't just disgusting, it was dangerous. Plagues, fevers, strange illnesses swept through these towns regularly, and though no one yet knew about bacteria, the connection between filth and sickness was impossible to ignore. Historians still debate whether the medieval mind truly understood disease transmission. Some say people believed bad smells the dreaded miasma caused illness. Others suggest they recognized patterns. Filth brought plague, so filth must be bad. Either way, the laws came. Too little, too late. You pause at the edge of the marketplace, where the mud is thickest. An official town notice, nailed crookedly to a post, reads something about fines for improper dumping. You smirk? Fines? In this economy? Most villagers couldn't even afford bread, let alone penalties for waste. And yet, there were attempts. In some places, rakers were employed early versions of street cleaners. They would scrape together the worst of the muck and cart it outside the town walls. Sometimes it was buried. Sometimes it was burned. Sometimes it was simply left in great steaming piles to rot. A fact you may find amusing. In some towns, the waste was sold to farmers as fertilizer. Talk about recycling. A gust of wind stirs the loose hairs by your face. The cold slices through your tunic. You pass a tavern where a man empties a slop bucket into the gutter. The liquid flows lazily downhill, adding to the brown rivers meandering between doorways. You step over it without thinking. It's just life. One curious tidbit. Some medieval towns introduced something called gong farmers. Their job? To empty cesspits and latrines. They worked at night in darkness shoveling human waste for a living. It paid surprisingly well, but the social stigma was unbearable. Gong farmers were both needed and despised. They smelled too much like the work they did. You shake your head, pulling your cloak tighter. You've heard stories of offenders who broke waste laws being sentenced to the stocks public humiliation for public contamination. Others were fined absurd sums they could never hope to pay. Still others, well, the truth is, Most people just got away with it. The law couldn't keep up with reality. The next corner you turn brings you to one of the rare medieval sanitation innovations, a stone-lined gutter. It's little more than a shallow trench, but at least it channels some of the filth away. If you're lucky, a recent rain might have washed the worst of it clear. Today, you're not so lucky. The stench rises in waves. You know, there are scholars who still debate whether these early sanitation laws helped at all. Did they actually reduce disease? Did they change behavior? Or were they symbolic acts of civic pride rather than public health? No one agrees. But one thing is certain. They were the first flickers of what would one day become modern sanitation. You pass a row of crooked homes, their windows shut, turd against the cold. You imagine the families inside, crouched by weak fires, sharing bowls of thin pottage, while buckets in the corner fill slowly with the inevitable byproducts of life. Chamber pots, slop pails, no one escapes. You sigh. The day fades toward twilight. Another evening ahead. Another night of cold floors, bitter winds, and treks to the nearest latrinia, more likely a corner of the yard. You have to smile at the absurdity of it. In a world where even the king squatted over a hole, what hope did the peasants have? And yet, somehow, people survived. They endured. They built the first bridges between filth and cleanliness, between chaos and control. The laws may have failed more often than not, but the idea that waste could and should be managed was born. You reach your hut at last, scrape your boots at the threshold, and step inside. The fire crackles softly. The same smells greet you. The same cold air presses in. But you made it through another day. You lie back on your straw mattress, your breath slow and even. Outside, the wind sighs through the streets, carrying with it the scent of wood smoke, frost, and something less pleasant. You close your eyes, and somewhere deep inside, in that fragile space between sleep and waking, you find yourself grateful. Grateful that one day, far in the future, someone would finally figure it all out. The door creaks as you step back out into the night. The memory of the castle moat and the half-hearted waste laws still fresh in your mind. But something deeper tugs at you. Now, something older than laws, older than cities, older than even kings. Fear. Not just the fear of slipping on the slick cobblestones, or the fear of the cold biting at your skin. No, this is the quiet, crawling fear that has haunted people for generations, what might be waiting for you in the dark when you answer nature's call. You see, in medieval times, going to the bathroom wasn't just a physical act. It was a brush with the supernatural, a moment of intense vulnerability when, according to centuries of superstition, the veil between this world and the unseen could thin. Historians still argue whether medieval folk truly believed in the toilet demons they whispered about her, whether it was just something to tell wide-eyed children beside smoky hearths. But to you, standing in the cold with a full bladder and a shiver crawling up your spine, belief feels very real. As you trudge towards the village latrinia, sagging outhouse perched over a pit of horrors, you remember the stories. The ones your grandmother told, the ones people still repeat in hushed voices. It's said that spirits live in the waste pits, waiting, lurking, feeding on the filth and snatching souls distracted by the most human of needs. A fringe tidbit. In ancient Rome, long before medieval Europe, people carved protective faces into latrine wall-stiny gods to guard the vulnerable. The idea that something might be watching during such moments has always haunted humanity. And in your time, this fear has only grown. Some villagers carry charm small bones, twisted bits of iron, or crudely carved wooden faces. Others mumble prayers before sitting, calling on saints to shield them from mischief. Historians still debate whether these were true religious beliefs or just a desperate attempt to control the uncontrollable. The night deepens as you reach the rickety outhouse. The door sags on broken hinges. You hesitate. It's not just the smell, though the stench is overwhelming. It's the eerie stillness. A legend stirs in your mind of the toilet demon said to cause sudden sickness to those who offended the unseen. No one knows its shape, only its foul breath and chilling touch. Some say witches collect waste for spell-human filth used in dark magic to curse neighbors or attract evil fortune. Others whisper that fairies the old kind, not the pretty ones from stories lurk near cesspits, ready to sow mischief if disrespected. You swallow hard. Even in the dirt and hunger of daily life, people cling to these beliefs like fragile shields against the unknown. You glance up at the moon, pale and ghostly behind thin clouds. Your breath fogs as you whisper the old words your grandmother taught you. Foul spirits, stay far. Let no shadow cross this door. The outhouse creaks as you push it open. Inside, the pit yawns dark and bottomless. You shiver. Another old superstition floats to mind. Some say that demons can slip into your body through the, exit door during such moments. You try not to think about it too hard. Curiously, some medieval towns had unwritten rules. You must knock 3 times before entering any outhouse at night. This, they claimed, would scare off any lurking spirits. Another odd belief held that witches could steal your soul through your waist if you didn't say a prayer first. They could claim your life with just a scrap of soiled cloth. You shake your head. Silly, perhaps. But as you finish and pull your tunic back down, the night air feels heavier somehow. As you walk back through the sludgy streets, you pass homes where thin candlelight flickers through cracked shutters. Somewhere, a dog howls. Somewhere else, a baby wails. The entire village hums with quiet dread. Even the animals seem restless. You wonder how much of this fear is real, and how much is simply the human mind, forever afraid of the dark. One historical fact that might amuse you: in some regions, special nighttime piss pots were kept inside homes not for convenience, but to avoid the dangers of stepping outside after dark. The fear of what might be waiting in the privy was so great that even the smell of waste indoors was preferable to facing the night. You reach your doorway, hand shaking slightly as you lift the latch. Inside, the fire has burned low, but it's warm enough. You crawl back under the coarse blanket, breath still quick from the cold and the crawl of old fears. Historians still argue whether these bathroom superstitions served a practical purpose, keeping people indoors during dangerous hours, or whether they were purely psychological relics from ancient fears. But for you, in this moment, none of that matters. The fear feels real. You close your eyes, the fire pops softly, the night stretches on, and somewhere, far beyond the edge of the village, the darkness. You stir awake before dawn once more, the faint glow of embers barely melting the chill in the air. The smell wood smoke, stale sweat, and that persistent undercurrent of earth and rot greets you immediately, more familiar than any daily ritual. But one thought rises above all else: you've got to pee. Again. You sit up, your spine complaining as always, fingers brushing dry straw that clings to your skin. Torches flicker in the corner, revealing shapes of family members, dozens of them, piled together for warmth. Privacy? Forget it. Not here. Not ever. You pull your tattered cloak over your shoulders to hold in what little heat there is and step into the dawn chill. Outside, the world is gray and damp. Mud coats your boots. Cold seeps through to your bones. You try not to think about a bath because you haven't had one in so long it's almost a concept, like rainbows or candlesticks. Instead, you shuffle over to the communal latrine, a sagging wooden structure that moans in the wind. You wonder, when were people even able to bathe regularly? In your lifetime, it's been weeks. Months? You can't quite tell. In medieval Europe, bathing was rare even for the relatively wealthy. Churches frowned on it, calling it vain or exposing, sometimes sinful. Water boiled for hours, fuel was scarce. For peasants like you, a full-body wash was a luxury reserved for visits to abbots, fairs, or weddings. And even then, it was rushed. A hurried dip in a wooden tub, a brisk scrub, and then back to the straw bed. Mostly, you washed your face and hands with what little water was left and hoped for the best. Historians still argue whether medieval people genuinely avoided bathing for fear of disease or simply because it was impractical. Some evidence suggests early bathhouses were centers of both cleanliness and socializing until towns began associating them with debauchery or disease outbreaks like plague, so they closed them. And that was that. You finish the morning routine and return to the hut, turning on an ember that still pulses weakly in the hearth. You brush the grime from your forearms, not exactly getting clean, but enough to keep the worst of the mud off your clothes. Breakfast arrives, pottage, stale bread, and ale that's warmed by being held in rough hands. Washing your hands? If you can find enough water and clean cloth, you'll skip it. No runoff, no rinse, no soap. The concept feels foreign. Remember how you struggled to pull water for bathing? Today, for one moment, you crave it. Clean water, enough to wash your hair, to rinse the filth from your skin. But instead, water is in a single wooden bucket, shared by the whole household for cooking, drinking, brief washing. It tastes faintly of smoke and tree resin. Even if you used it for a bath, you'd give the same water to your child with a dry cough. The idea seems cruel. And then there's the reality. Without regular bathing, everything clogs your pores, your skin, your hair. The sweat and grime from labor in the field cements. Lice, fleas, body odor, they're not just nuisances. They're now part of your skin's ecosystem. A kind of medieval camouflage. You smell like everyone else. You look like everyone else. You are everyone else. Survival strategy or biological burden? You can't tell. These conditions made toilet trips worse. Dirt crusted to your thighs, dust in your eyes. The rough wooden seats scraped skin, sometimes leaving splinters. You wonder if those curses and superstitions weren't just old ruin, they were born from this very horror. No separation between flesh and filth, no escape from it. At midday the sun climbs, but warmth doesn't reach you. Labor calls again, wood to chop, water to haul, earth to till. You try to tug off your tunic, wash your face in well water. A quick splash, it's not a bath, but it's a hint of what might have been. You drop your head and finish a prayer under breath. Lord, make this day end soon. And yet, when the hour comes to go again, when your bowels jolt, you realize lack of bathing has made it worse. Skin is chafed, hands raw. The sun has baked grit into every fold. When doing your business, the friction stings. You hiss in pain. There's no soft cushion of clean cloth, just rough wool. You curse quietly, spit a curse into the mud, then shuffle back, clothes plastered to flesh, boots crusted. One fringe fact: some wealthy individuals used perfumed gloves or scented handkerchiefs. Others tucked lavender sprigs into collars or door sills to mask the odor. Imagine that. Perfume as a barrier between person and place of hygiene. For peasants, there was no penniless luxury of sweet-smelling herbs. Only the bitter taste of soap, or more often, ash and sand used for modest scrubbing. Bathing or lack thereof meant toilets were sites of insult and injury. Poorly splinted boards bowed under weight. Splinters punctured flesh. Flies nestled in cracks, hatched larvae on contact. You swat at them as you push open the door. The stench is molten in your nose. Nausea catches at your chest. You breathe quick to keep the stench shallow. You remember your grandmother's words. The Lord's privy may be clean, but his stink rides with him. You think of the gap between classes bath privilege versus stench burden. The medieval world isn't kind to anybody. Dirt doesn't count your station. It covers them all. On your way back, midday sun does little to dry the mud in the street. Sweat sticks. Dust flies. The morning's damp has become afternoon's grime. You think of a proper bathhouse. Warm water, a basin, soap. You could almost taste it, but that's centuries away. Civilization hasn't caught up to the need just yet. The day continues. Evenings come, and the final toilet trip of the day is when you feel it most. Bathing's absence becomes agony. Limbs ache. Skin prickles with dried sweat. Returning inside, you fling your mud-stiff cloak, climb back into the straw, and grit your teeth through stinging wool that clings to every sore. You close your eyes, you ache. You wonder how much worse life gets before it gets any better. But tomorrow, the same cycle begins. And again, you survive. Because that's all life is right now. surviving in a world where cleanliness is the most distant dream. The embers have died to ash by the time you stir once more. It's dark, damp, and your joints throb from another night on straw. Before your eyes even open, you feel it. The grimy itch of unwashed skin, the weight of sweat, soaked cloth clinging to your bones. You sigh. The first thought that drifts through your half-conscious mind isn't food. It isn't warmth. It's the toilet. Again, you rise slowly, spine creaking, knees popping, breath coming out in a ghostly cloud. But as you stagger to your feet, you can't help but wonder what would it be like, just once, to be them. The rich, the lords, the ladies, the ones who sit in stone halls and wear robes of velvet, not patched wool. Surely their bathroom experience isn't like this, is it? It isn't. In the medieval world, toileting, like everything else, was split by class. A chasm between peasant and noble so wide, so absurd, it could barely be crossed. Historians still debate how much comfort even the rich enjoyed, but one thing is certain: the poor always had it worse. As you step outside into the cold dawn air, you glance up at the distant silhouette of the Lord's Manor, perched high on its artificial mound. Somewhere behind those thick walls, the nobility perform the same bodily functions but in conditions you can't even dream of. Not luxury by modern standards, neither were no golden toilets or flushing marvels. But there was privacy. There was distance. There were people whose entire job was to carry away the filth of their masters. You trudge toward your familiar latrine, a battered, splintering shack that leans to one side like it's already halfway to the grave. Your breath catches in your throat as the door creaks open. The stench slams into you. Familiar, unforgiving, unchanged. You swallow hard and steel yourself for the task at hand. Meanwhile, the nobles relieve themselves in guardrobe stone chambers, built into castle walls with holes that emptied directly into moats or cesspits far below. They didn't have to smell it. They didn't have to empty it. They didn't even have to think about it. Servants like the gong farmers or the so-called nightmen were tasked with clearing waste from the pits, shoveling human filth by the bucket in exchange for a handful of coins and eternal social disgust. A quirky tidbit: some noble guardrabes were located high in castle towers with wooden seats covered in embroidered cloth. Lavish compared to the peasant's crude wooden plank. Yet, as scholars still argue, even these luxuries were primitive. Moisture, freezing drafts, and ratsias. Rats were common guests in even the grandest of medieval restrooms. And yet, as you squat in the half-collapsed shed, you can't help but envy them. Not because they're immune to the cold or the stench, but because they don't have to live with it, hour after hour, day after day. Back at the manor, a noblewoman might not even touch her own chamber pot. A servant would empty it discreetly, without eye contact, without acknowledgement. It was as if waste didn't exist for the rich, like some secret kept hidden behind silk curtains and heavy doors. For peasants, though, waste was everything. It was unavoidable. It was the filth that stained your hands, your home, your breath, your life. You try not to breathe too deeply as you finish, wiping with rough wool that scratches against already chafed skin. The wind cuts through the gaps in the walls, freezing your legs as you rise, shivering. You spit into the dirt and mutter a curse, half in frustration, half in exhaustion. Toileting, you realize, is not just a matter of comfort, it's a matter of survival. For the poor, poor hygiene means sickness, illness, death. The Black Death swept through these lands not once, but in waves. Fleas, rats, and human waste all woven into the same cruel tapestry. The rich could flee. The poor could only stay and die. Historians still debate whether nobles' guardrabes contributed to castle defense or disease. Some argue that the constant waste flowing down walls made siege ladders treacherous, slicked with filth. Others say these same systems turned castles into disease traps. Either way, the rich still had more choice. As you make your way back to your hut, mud squelching beneath your worn boots, you notice the neighbors lining up for their own toilet turn. Everyone's face is the same, resigned, hollow-eyed, wrapped in layers of cloth too thin for this cold. The smell hangs over the village like a fog. No one mentions it. no one complains. This is life. And in this life, the class divide isn't just about who eats meat and who starves. It's about who smells like waste and who gets to pretend they don't. It's about who lives waist deep in filth and who can pay someone else to bear the burden. The gap between rich and poor is written in every breath you take, in every step to the latrine, in every wash basin you don't have, in every curse you mutter under your breath while wiping with leaves. You reach your doorway again, muscles stiff, joints aching, and duck inside. The warmth is minimal. The smell is inescapable. You pull your threadbare blanket over your shoulders, close your eyes, and think, maybe, just maybe, one day people will live differently. But for now, there is no escape, only sleep. And the certainty that tomorrow you will rise and do it all again. The morning air bites your skin as you shuffle out of your straw bedding once more, joints stiff, breath ghosting in the frigid room. But today, something feels different. As you groggily step into the cold, you notice her, your sister, your mother, your neighbor's wife, each of them waiting, faces drawn, shoulders hunched, eyes tired in the dim dawn light. And it hits you. For women, medieval toileting is an even greater misery. In the dark corners of history, the struggle of medieval women around basic hygiene often goes unsaid. Historians still argue whether women were given any real consideration in the design of medieval sanitation because, for the most part, they weren't. Women faced the same freezing winds, the same rotten planks, the same filth bud, with the added burden of modesty, danger, and near constant judgment. You follow the familiar mud path to the village latrine, your breath sharp in your throat, your fingers numb from cold. But Shay, the woman ahead of you, glances nervously over her shoulder. Always. Because for women, using the toilet isn't just uncomfortable, it's risky. In most medieval villages, there are no gendered toilets. The bathroom is a shared nightmare. A wooden shack in the open, or worse, a bucket behind the house. Privacy? Forget it. There's barely a door. In winter, the walls warp. In summer, flies swarm. And for women, there's always the fear of being seen, of being mocked, of being attacked. One quirky fact. In some towns, women use separate privy corners, shielded by hanging cloth or wooden partitions. But even this was rare. Most of the time, they used the same open pits as men, forced to hike skirts and crouch, exposed to both weather and wandering eyes. And with no underwear, because medieval peasants didn't have such luxuries, every trip to the toilet was an act of uncomfortable vulnerability. She crouches now, her fingers white-knuckled on the doorframe, her breath catching as she hurries through the act. You turn your eyes away out of respect, but also because you know what it's like to need to go and to dread it at the same time. And then there's menstruation and unspoken, ever-present reality. Historians still debate how medieval women managed their periods. Some suggest moss, rags, or nothing at all. There are no sanitary products, no running water, no discreet waste disposal. For poor women, a period meant more discomfort, more exposure, and often more shame. The communal toilet made privacy impossible. You watch as she returns to the hut, cheeks flushed from cold and humiliation. There's no chance to clean properly. The water bucket is half frozen. Her hands tremble as she wipes them on her apron, though it makes no difference. The dirt clings. For noble women, it's marginally better. They have servant chambermaids who carry away waste, who draw water for sponge baths. But even they must suffer the indignity of chamber pots, porcelain bowls hidden behind silk screens, emptied discreetly but never truly hidden from the smells. Some castles included private guardrobes for noble women, but as historians still note, these spaces were cold, drafty, and only marginally less revolting. In the village, though, women face more than discomfort, they face judgment. A woman seen too often at the latrine might be gossiped about, her cleanliness questioned, her morals, even her soul, whispered over. It's absurd, you think, but it's real. The medieval world doesn't just punish the body, it punishes the mind. You glance again at the crumbling latrine. The wood is slick with frost. The floorboards bend underfoot. One wrong move, and someone could fall sick, injured, or worse. For women, slipping meant not just physical pain, but the crushing weight of humiliation in a community where news spreads faster than fire. And then there's pregnancy. For expectant mothers, toileting is agony. There are no soft seats, no supportive hands, just cold, splintered wood and aching joints. Labor pains in a medieval world are already fatal enough without adding the risk of falling into an open cesspit. She wipes her hands on her apron again, her face blank with exhaustion, and you offer a nod as she passes. There are no words, just the shared understanding of suffering. At midday, when nature calls again, you notice the way the women hesitate. Some try to hold it in. Others wait for the cover of dusk. But bodies don't care about modesty. Eventually, everyone must go. You trudge through the mud once more, passing women carrying bundles of sticks, baskets of leeks, all with the same hollow-eyed look. The world of medieval Europe doesn't make space for comforties, especially not for women. Even in towns with public bathhouses, women were often discouraged from attending. Rumors spread, bathhouses were sinful, women were warned away. The result? More filth, more infection, more suffering in silence. One noblewoman, history tells, died from infection caused by poor hygiene during menstruation because even wealth couldn't buy knowledge they didn't have. Physicians still debated whether bathing helped or harmed the body. Some warned it opened the pores, making disease more likely. Others argued the exact opposite. Historians still debate which idea held sway in different regions. Either way, most women were left without guidance. The evening draws near. You gather near the hearth, the flickering fire barely warding off the damp. She sits across from you, her eyes distant. You both know night will come, and with it, another trip to that wretched latrine. Another shivering squat in the dark. You close your eyes. You dream of warm baths, of clean cloth, of privacy. Of a world that cares for bodies, not punishes them. But that world is centuries away. For now, you sleep. Tomorrow, it begins again. The first golden hints of dawn creep through the cracks in your wooden hut, and your bones ache before your eyes even open. But this morning, something is different. Today, you're not staying. Today, you're traveling. You gather your tattered cloak, sling a satchel over your aching shoulder, and step into the cold. Your feet sink into mud. Your breath forms clouds. But there's no time to waste. You've been tasked with delivering a message to the next village, 10 miles away. You sigh. 10 medieval miles. On foot, through fields, woods, and muddy paths. But before you take your first weary step, one thought flashes through your mind. Where exactly are you supposed to go to the bathroom? Because if toileting is miserable at home, it's infinitely worse on the road. Medieval Europe is not designed for travelers. There are no roadside inns with porcelain bowls, no gas station rest stops, just miles of open countryside, hedgerows and forests, teeming with things that bite, sting, or crawl. Nature calls. Nature becomes your toilet, but not without challenges. Historians still debate how travelers manage their bodily needs on long journeys. Some suggest that peasants accustomed to outdoor life simply squatted wherever they could. Others argue that certain roadside chapels or monastic outposts may have offered primitive facilities. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. People went wherever they could, whenever they could. You trudge forward, boots slipping in cold mud, and you already feel it, that familiar pressure building. There's no choice. You glance around. Bare fields, thorny bushes, a copse of trees in the distance. That's it. You veer off the path, heart pounding not from urgency alone, but from fear. In these lands, even a simple act like relieving yourself comes with risks. First, there's the cold. It cuts through every layer of cloth, numbing your skin as you crouch low in the undergrowth. Then, there's the wildlife. Foxes, wild boar, even wolves lurk in the shadows. One wrong move, one unfortunate timing, and you could be prey before you finish. And finally, there's the people. Bandits roam these roads. Outlaws, deserters, desperate men. A traveler caught vulnerable is easy pickings. Women, especially, are at risk. Even men, though no one is truly safe out here. You shiver as you finish quickly, wiping with leaves because, of course, there's nothing else. The wind stings your skin. You stand, tugging your worn tunic into place, heart pounding faster than before. Every rustle in the trees sets your nerves on edge. This, you realize, is reality for every traveler. Pilgrims on the road to Canterbury, merchants walking to distant fairs, soldiers marching to distant battles. Kings and queens had their own privies carried in ornate carriages, but for the common folk, it was always this: a bush, a hedge, a silent prayer that no one was watching. Quirky fact: some wealthy travelers brought wooden chamber pots along, carried by servants in carts. But for you, a peasant messenger, there's only dirt and desperation. You continue on, feet numb, legs sore. Hours pass. The road winds through endless hills. Hunger gnaws at your belly, but worse still is the growing awareness that you'll need to go again before reaching shelter. And this time, the land is flatter, more exposed. No cover, just open grasslands under a pale sky. You glance around, panic simmering. There are ancient legends of spirits haunting travelers caught at their most vulnerable. The toileting ghosts. Some call them a blend of folklore and childish fear. Scholars still argue whether such tales were meant to scare children or carry hidden warnings about real dangers, wild animals, violent strangers, or simply the humiliation of being seen. Eventually, you crouch low behind a sad excuse for a shrub, shivering as the wind howls. The process is fast, crude, and utterly degrading. You can't shake the feeling of exposure, of being watched, of being somehow less human out here. And then, worse still, what to do with waste? In villages, at least the waste went into cesspits or the streets. Out here, you leave behind. Well, nature's reminder. In high-traffic routes, certain grassy patches probably became unofficial stopping spots, but there were no rules. No signs, just instinct. The rich, of course, traveled differently. Wealthy caravans sometimes included canvas tents with makeshift privy as a whole dug hastily, lined with cloth, then buried afterward. Servants cleaned up the mess. But even for nobility, travel meant discomfort. No matter your status, the medieval road was harsh. You stagger back to the muddy path, brushing dirt from your hands. The cold has settled deep into your bones now. Your stomach growls. You have miles to go. But the worst thought of all? Even when you reach your destination, there will be no comfort. Just another drafty hut. Another freezing latrine. The road winds onward. You trudge. You ache. You dread. The next time nature calls, by nightfall, you collapse in a barn, straw sticking to your skin. There's no latrine here, just an outhouse leaning on its last legs. You can't even care anymore. Exhaustion wins. Before sleep, one last thought lingers. Modern people will never understand this. The cold, the filth, the fear, the endless discomfort. Someday, you dream, there will be soft toilet paper, clean bathrooms, warm water. Someday, but not yet. For now, you close your eyes. You breathe shallowly through your mouth, and you sleep. You wake to the sound of roosters. Your body sore from another night spent on damp straw. Your eyes sting from smoke. Your mouth tastes like old pennies. But something tugs at your thoughts this morning, something almost impossible to imagine here, in the mud and misery of medieval life. A world where toilets actually improve. You sit up slowly, wrapping your arms around yourself for warmth, and try to picture it. Indoor plumbing, porcelain thrones, running water. It seems like fantasy. Yet the earliest seeds of this miracle are being planted right now, even here, in this grimy world of wooden buckets and open ditches. Historians still argue over when and where the very first toilets appeared. Some point to ancient Rome with its elaborate public latrines, marble seats, flowing water, communal chatter. Others highlight even older civilizations, the Indus Valley, for example, where rudimentary drainage systems kept cities surprisingly clean. But after Rome fell, Europe forgot. And for over 1,000 years, toilets became little more than holes in the ground. You shuffle outside, breath clouding the icy air, and glance toward the village moat. The same moat where last night's waste was likely dumped. But today's journey isn't about enduring this. It's about how humanity slowly, painfully began to demand something better. You pass by the castle's outer walls. High above, in the stone keep, the lord and lady might enjoy a rare luxury, a guardrobe, a tiny stone chamber perched dangerously over empty air or overhanging the moat. It's no more than a hole in the floor. No comfort, no dignity. But it's a start. One quirky fact: medieval garderobes were often lined with herbs lavender, mint, even juniperto masked the stench. Some historians believe the term wardrobe actually evolved from these privy chambers where clothes were sometimes hung to keep them free from fleas. But for the average peasant like you, the path toward modern bathrooms is barely visible. You walk through the muddy square. The public latrine, if the village even has one, is a crude plank over a pit, buzzing with flies. Disease spreads fast in such places. Dysentery, typhoid, cholera stalk silently through the streets. The link between human waste and illness is not yet understood, though whispers and old wives' tales suggest a connection. You glance toward the church bell tower. Even religious institutions, monasteries, abbeys struggle with sanitation. Monks use communal latrines, sometimes built directly over running water streams when possible. But these are rare exceptions. In cities, people still dump chamber pots straight onto cobblestones with the customary cry, "Gardez l'eau! Watch out for the water!" And yet, something stirs. By the late Middle Ages, some wealthier towns begin experimenting with more sophisticated systems. Stone-lined drains, covered waste channels, even cesspits with rudimentary ventilation shafts. Small steps, tiny, imperfect revolutions. You pull your cloak tighter as you cross a rickety wooden bridge. The smell of waste hangs thick in the morning air. Your boots squelch through mud that you know, deep down, is more than just earth. But you've heard rumor stories brought by traveling merchants from distant lands. In far-off Constantinople, public bathhouses flourish. In Moorish Spain, some homes boast tiled bathrooms. In China, primitive paper used for wiping has already been invented centuries ahead of Europe's scratchy moss and leaves. Historians still debate why medieval Europe lags so far behind in sanitation. Some blame the collapse of the Roman Empire. Others point to religious taboos, poverty, or sheer ignorance. The truth, perhaps, is that no one cared enough or knew enough to demand change. You reach the village edge, where fields stretch endlessly. Somewhere in the future, people will carry pocket-sized soaps. They'll flush toilets without thinking. They'll have hot showers, soft towels, scented candles. All of it will come. But not for you. Not yet. Even when the first proper flush toilet is invented in the 16th century by Sir John Harrington Most, people won't adopt it for another 200 years. And sewer systems? They won't arrive until the 19th century. After deadly cholera outbreaks force governments to act, progress will crawl, inch by painful inch. But for now, you have none of this. You have the bucket, the ditch, the open field. You have cold nights, shivering squats, and the ever-present fear of falling into something you'll never quite crawl out of. One open scholarly debate lingers. Did the reluctance to bathe and build better toilets stem more from fear of disease, religious beliefs, or sheer logistical challenges? Scholars argue over this still, piecing together medieval mindsets from fragments of letters, laws, and faded manuscripts. You walk back to your hut, the dawn now brighter. The village stirs. A child tosses slop into the gutter. A woman scrubs her hands with ash and cold water. Life, such as it is, continues. But deep inside you, the seed of change stirs. Someday, you think someday people will look back at this filth and shudder. Someday, waste will vanish with the pull of a chain. Hands will be clean. Streets will shine. For now, though, you step carefully. One false move, one misplaced foot, and you'll be the next tale whispered around the hearth. You sigh. You keep walking. And you dream. You lie there, on the damp straw mattress, your body aching, your mind foggy, and your heart weighed down by the sheer misery of another medieval day survived. The chill seeps into your bones as the smoky air clings to your hair and clothing. The faint rustle of rats in the dark corners of the hut reminds you you're never really alone or not in this life, not in this time. You shift, grimacing at the stiffness in your limbs. It's strange, isn't it? To think that one day, in a distant future, people will wake in cozy beds with memory foam mattresses, soft cotton sheets, and climate control at the touch of a button. The idea of that warmth, that safety, that dignity, it feels so impossibly far away from where you are now, in the grimy heart of the Middle Ages. Historians still debate whether people of your time even realized how filthy, how brutal, how unspeakably grim their daily existence was. Some scholars argue that medieval folk accepted dirt as normal, just another part of life. Others insist that even then, complaints about stench, discomfort, and sickness were whispered behind closed doors, shared around smoky hearths, carried from village to village by gossip and rumor. You cough softly, the soot from the cooking fire stinging your throat. Somewhere deep inside, though, the thought burns. Surely this isn't how life is meant to be. Surely there must be something better. One quirky fact. The word toilet itself didn't even refer to a bathroom until the 19th century. Before that, it referred to the process of getting dressed or grooming oneself. The humble act of, well, doing your business didn't even have a polite name. You just went. In a bucket, or a ditch, or a moat. The wind rattles the wooden shutters. Somewhere nearby, you hear the splatter of waste being emptied into the street, another chamber pot flung from a window with the familiar cry of "Gardez-l'eau!" The words ancient French for "watch out for the water" are useless, of course. No one ever moves fast enough, and besides, everything already stinks. You close your eyes and try to imagine a world you'll never see. Cities with underground sewers, clean public restrooms, toilet paper, scented hand soap, tiny bottles of hand sanitizer clipped to keychains, a place where waste vanishes at the push of a handle. Historians still argue whether the greatest leaps in sanitation came from scientific discovery, rising urban populations, or simple human disgust. The truth? Probably a bit of all three. But for you, change is centuries away. Even in the most advanced homes, the castles and manors people still relieve themselves into drafty guardrobes or use chamber pots. The wealthy might own fancy ceramic bowls. They might scatter herbs across the floor to mask the smell. But in the end, it all ends up in the same place: the street, the moat, or the earth. You shift again, pulling your threadbare blanket higher. Your feet are cold. The straw beneath you smells faintly of mildew and old sweat. And still, you dream. Because somewhere in your mind, the idea of comfort lingers. You imagine golden taps pouring endless hot water, porcelain bowls that carry waste away in swirling water, scented candles on bathroom shelves, heated floors, soft, thick towels, tiny luxuries that no one in your village could even comprehend. One last quirky fact drifts through your mind. In the Victorian era, before the widespread adoption of flush toilets, some wealthy people used close stools, essentially fancy wooden chairs with hidden chamber pots inside. These were sometimes so beautifully crafted that guests didn't realize they were sitting on a disguised toilet. The lengths humans go to avoid embarrassment. You smile, just faintly, despite yourself. Your breath slows. The day's miseries, the foul smells, the aching joints, the cold that bites deep begin to fade. Sleep tugs at your eyelids. Before you drift away completely, one final thought surfaces. In the world to come, people will complain about the tiniest things: a flickering light bulb, a weak shower, a slightly cold toilet seat. They'll never know this. They'll never feel the hunger, the filth, the shame, the sheer endurance it took to survive even one day in your time. And yet, thanks to centuries of small revolutions, public health reforms, technological breakthroughs, human stubbornness, they'll live in a world where sanitation is a right, not a luxury. You exhale softly. You don't know it yet, but the distant future holds more comfort than your world could possibly imagine. And for now, that's enough. The rats scurry. The wind moans. You fall asleep. Sweet dreams, but the future is not something you'll ever touch. You drift deeper into the night, the coarse wool scratching your skin, your breath misting into the icy air. The wind outside groans through the gaps in the wooden planks of your hut, carrying with it the distant sounds of life. Hooves clattering on cobbles, a baby's weak cry, the slosh of wastewater dumped from some unseen window. It's the music of medieval life messy, loud, uncomfortable, and entirely indifferent to your exhaustion. Even now, in this fragile moment between waking and sleep, you can't help but marvel, if only in some half-conscious corner of your mind, at just how far the world could go from here. You've seen the worst. You've trudged through streets ankle-deep in filth. You've squatted over splintered boards. You've wiped with leaves, rags, or on bad days nothing at all. The sheer indignity of it lingers, woven into your bones. And yet, time moves forward. It always does. Quirky fact. In ancient Rome, public toilets were social spaces. People sat side by side on long stone benches with holes, chatting as they did their business, using shared sponges on sticks to clean themselves. As horrifying as that sounds today, in your medieval reality, even such primitive public luxury would seem sophisticated. You stir slightly in the straw, picturing the unimaginable, a time when every home has a private place for relief. When people lock doors behind them, when air fresheners mask all scents, and tiles gleam under warm yellow light. Historians still argue whether it was industrialization, disease, or the rise of the middle class that finally pushed society toward real sanitation reforms. Some say it was the great cholera outbreaks of the 1800s that forced London and Paris to build proper sewers. Others claim it was simply the spread of literacy and science people learning that germs, invisible but deadly, lived in every foul puddle and splatter. Either way, none of that will happen for you. For you, this is life. The same cold mornings, the same aching joints, the same buckets, ditches, moats, and chamber pots. And yet somewhere, deep inside, you hold on to a sliver of hope. A belief, perhaps, that the world doesn't have to stay this way forever. You think about the children, about those born today, or tomorrow, or 10 years from now. Will their world look the same? Will they too wake shivering, with filth under their nails, with lice in their hair, with no privacy, no dignity, no comfort? Or will someone, somewhere, find a better way? A tiny smile tugs at your cracked lips. In your half-sleep haze, the images come unbidden. Futuristic glass towers, endless lights, people traveling in machines faster than horses, drinking clean water from sparkling taps, restrooms that clean themselves, soap in every color, every scent. The idea of waste simply disappearing, no smell, no danger, no thought. It's absurd. And yet, somewhere, somehow, it feels possible. One more curious tidbit floats to your mind. In 1596, Sir John Harrington invented the first flush toilet in England, a wooden seat with a cistern above. It was a marvel, but no one really cared. For centuries after, people still preferred chamber pots and open sewers. Change is slow, always slow. The rats scurry again. A soft snore rises from the family member sleeping beside you. Your knees ache, your belly rumbles, but your mind drifts away to that shimmering, impossible future. Maybe one day someone will tell your story. Maybe one day, far away, someone will fall asleep to the sound of your imagined suffering, soothed by the knowledge that they, unlike you, live in warmth, in safety, in cleanliness. Historians still argue whether humanity will ever truly appreciate how far it has come, whether comfort breeds gratitude or complacency. But for you, in this cold darkness, the very idea of comfort is enough to bring peace. Your breathing slows, your heart settles, the world softens, and you sleep. For now, at least. Sweet dreams. As you lie there, letting your eyes drift closed, it's strange to think how far the world has come from the days of chamber pots and open sewers. The sounds of the medieval streets fed no more sloshing buckets, no more cries of Gardaloo, no more muddy boots slipping on filth-slick stones. Instead, Your mind floats gently toward warmth, soft pillows, clean sheets, a world where a simple bathroom visit isn't a daily ordeal but an afterthought. A world of hot showers, fresh towels, and fluffy rugs underfoot. Historians still argue whether we truly appreciate these comforts. Some say people today take too much for granted. Others believe that remembering the hardships of the past like we've done tonight keeps that gratitude alive. Either way, here you are, safe in this quiet moment. Your breathing slows, the heaviness of the day lifts, and as you sink deeper into rest, the distant echoes of medieval life, its smells, its discomforts, its endless struggles fade into shadows. You made it. Through the cold, through the filth, through the hardship. And now all that's left is peace. Let yourself drift. Let the quiet carry you. There's nothing you need to do right now. Nothing you need to fix. Just breathe. Just rest. The past is far away. The warmth of the present wraps around you. Sleep well. Sweet dreams.